Ambassador Krelth stood outside the massive doors of the Galactic Senate chambers, his 6 arms working quickly to check each piece of his ceremonial battle armor. The thick metal plates gleamed under the bright lights, and each one told a story through its scratches and dents. These marks came from 200 years of heated debates, angry discussions, and the occasional diplomatic accident that could have killed him. Around him, hundreds of other alien representatives were doing the same thing. The tall, bird-like creatures from the wind worlds were testing their energy shields, making sure the invisible barriers would protect them from hostile thoughts and dangerous emotions. The rock people from the heavy planets were checking their stone armor, tapping each piece to make sure it would not crack under pressure. The fish-like beings from the water systems were filling their protective suits with their special breathing liquid. Everyone was getting ready for what could be a very dangerous day in the Senate. Everyone except the humans. Krelth watched in horror as a human woman walked right past him wearing nothing but a simple blue business suit. She had short brown hair, carried a brown leather bag and wore thin glasses. That was it. No armor, no shields, no protective gear at all. Her name tag read, Margaret Williams, Earth Representative. Krelth had been a diplomat for 2 centuries, and he had never seen anything so foolish. Did this human not understand how dangerous Senate debates could be? Did she not know that angry senators could accidentally kill people with their emotions alone? The great doors opened with a deep rumble, and all the representatives walked into the enormous chamber. The room was so big that small clouds actually formed near the ceiling. Thousands of seats were arranged in circles, each one designed for a different type of alien body. Some seats floated in the air for flying creatures, others were filled with water for sea dwellers, and some glowed with special light for beings made of pure energy. Krelth took his seat and watched Margaret Williams sit down just 3 rows in front of him. She pulled out a simple notebook and a pen, actual paper and ink like some primitive creature. Around her, other senators were powering up force fields that could stop laser blasts, but she just sat there writing notes like she was in a library. The meeting started quietly enough. Senator Vorthak, a huge creature that looked like a walking mountain, announced the first topic: trade routes between the spiral arms. This was usually boring stuff that put half the chamber to sleep. But then Senator Thraxon from the War World stood up. His powered armor made him look like a giant metal beast as he spoke through his voice amplifier. I propose we increase military spending by 15% across all member worlds. The galaxy is becoming more dangerous every day, and we must be ready. The reaction was immediate and explosive. The fire beings from the hot stars began glowing brighter and brighter, their anger making the temperature in their section rise to over 500 degrees. The metal seats around them started to melt. The sound weavers from the music planets began singing their disagreement in voices that shattered glass across the chamber. The gravity controllers got so upset that they accidentally made their area so heavy that the floor cracked. This was exactly why everyone needed armor. Alien emotions were deadly. The acid speakers started arguing, and their words were so poisonous that the air itself began to dissolve where they sat. Green smoke rose from their section. The mind readers got angry and began broadcasting their thoughts so loudly that 3 junior diplomats fainted from mental overload. The lightning people started sparking with electricity, sending blue bolts dancing across their protective barriers. Through all of this chaos, Margaret Williams sat calmly in her simple suit, still writing in her notebook. Krelth watched in amazement as waves of deadly heat passed over her without effect. Poisonous gases swirled around her, but she did not even cough. Gravity fields that could crush bones swept past her, but she just kept writing. A young insect-like diplomat from the hive world scuttled over to her, his shell armor clicking with worry. "Human Williams," he buzzed through his translator, "you should get to safety. The fire beings are about to reach critical temperature. You could be burned to ash in seconds." Margaret looked up from her notes and smiled. The expression was so calm and confident that it made Krelth's skin crawl. No creature should be that relaxed during a Senate riot. "Thank you for your concern," she said in a voice that somehow carried clearly through all the noise, "but I think everyone is just getting a bit excited. They will calm down soon." The insect diplomat stared at her with all 6 of his eyes. "But Human Williams, what if someone gets really angry? What if there is an accident?" The pressure lords once got so upset they created a black hole right here in the chamber. Margaret nodded as if this was perfectly normal. "Then we will deal with it when it happens. That is what adults do." She went back to writing in her notebook while explosions of light, heat, sound, and various deadly energies swirled around her unprotected body. Krelth realized he was holding his breath, waiting for her to be killed by some stray burst of alien emotion. But nothing happened to her. She just kept taking notes like she was watching a slightly interesting movie. Finally, the chaos began to die down as the various senators ran out of energy or remembered where they were. Margaret Williams stood up, and somehow, impossibly, the entire enormous chamber fell completely silent. Every eye, sensor, and detection organ turned to look at the small human woman in her simple blue suit. She was about to speak, and Krelth suddenly realized that everything was about to change forever. Margaret Williams stood in the center of the great chamber, looking tiny compared to the massive alien beings around her. The silence was so complete that Krelth could hear his own hearts beating inside his armor. After all the noise and chaos, the sudden quiet felt strange and heavy. "Honored delegates," Margaret began, her voice clear and strong without any electronic help, "I think we have been looking at this problem the wrong way." Senator Thraxon shifted his enormous metal body, and his armor made grinding sounds like a factory. His voice came out through speakers that made everything shake. "Human Williams, you speak of problems, but the real problem is your safety. How can you take part in serious discussions without protection? One angry thought from a mind reader could turn your brain to soup. One heat burst from a fire being could cook you like meat." Margaret smiled again, and this time Krelth noticed that several other delegates moved backward in their seats. There was something about that smile that made even the most dangerous creatures in the galaxy nervous. "Senator Thraxon, you have just proven my point perfectly," she said, walking closer to his massive armored form. "You are so worried about protecting yourself from everyone else that you have forgotten why we are here." She gestured around the chamber with her bare hand, no glove, no force field, nothing but human skin and bone. "Look around this room. What do you see?" The crystalline delegate, a creature that looked like living glass, spoke in a voice like wind chimes. "We see representatives of 400 worlds, gathered to make important decisions for the galaxy." "No," Margaret said firmly. "You see 400 different types of armor. You see shields and barriers and walls. You see creatures so afraid of each other that they cannot even breathe the same air." She walked between the rows of seats, passing close to beings that could kill her with a single wrong move. The fire beings dimmed their glow as she approached, afraid they might hurt her by accident. The acid speakers held their breath so their poisonous words would not reach her. "The fire beings make heat because they care deeply about their ideas," Margaret explained, stopping next to their section. "When something matters to them, their whole body shows it. That heat is not a weapon, it is passion." She moved to the sound weavers next. "These beautiful creatures do not make noise to hurt anyone. They sing because that is how their people have always shared ideas. Every note carries meaning that your translators cannot explain." The sound weavers began humming softly, a gentle melody that made everyone in the chamber feel somehow calmer. Margaret nodded approvingly and continued walking. "The pressure lords do not crush things because they are angry," she said, approaching the section where gravity was still twice normal strength. "They change gravity because that is how they show the weight of their thoughts. Heavy ideas need heavy gravity." Young diplomat Chitrick from the Hive Worlds buzzed nervously, his shell armor clicking. "But Human Williams, what happens when emotions get too strong? What if someone loses control? The records show that 43 delegates have died in this chamber from accidents." Margaret stopped and looked directly at him. 43 deaths in 3,000 years of meetings. "Do you know how many humans died last year on Earth from traffic accidents alone?" The chamber was quiet as delegates tried to understand what she meant. "Over 1 million, Margaret continued. "But we still drive cars. We still cross streets. We still live our lives because we understand that some risks are worth taking." She walked back toward the center of the chamber. "You have all built these amazing defenses to protect yourselves from each other. But what are you really protecting? Your bodies? Or your fear?" The mind reader delegate, a creature that looked like a floating brain in a glass jar, spoke through telepathy that everyone could hear. "Human Williams, fear keeps us alive. Fear prevents accidents. Without proper caution, this chamber would be a graveyard." Margaret nodded respectfully. "Fear is useful, yes. But too much fear becomes a prison. You are all so busy defending yourselves that you cannot truly hear what others are trying to say." She pulled out her simple notebook and held it up. "This is my only protection. Paper and ink. No shields, no armor, no force fields. Just preparation and the belief that everyone in this room is here for the same reason I am." "And what reason is that?" Senator Thraxon asked, his voice slightly quieter than before. "To make the galaxy better," Margaret said simply. "To solve problems together that we cannot solve alone. To find ways for 400 different species to live and work together peacefully." She looked around the chamber, making eye contact with as many delegates as possible. But how can we work together if we are all hiding behind walls? How can we understand each other if we are afraid to feel what others feel? The thermal being delegate, whose body looked like living fire, dimmed his flames to speak. Human Williams, your words are interesting, but they do not change reality. We are different species with different biologies. What is safe for you might kill us, and what is normal for us might destroy you. Margaret walked toward the thermal being, getting close enough that the heat should have burned her instantly. But somehow she stood there comfortably, as if she were standing next to a warm fireplace instead of a creature made of plasma. You are right, she said. We are different. But being different does not mean we have to be dangerous to each other. It means we have to be more careful, more thoughtful, and more willing to trust. She turned to face the entire chamber. I am going to make a suggestion that will probably sound crazy to all of you. But I ask that you think about it carefully before you decide. The silence stretched on as every delegate waited to hear what the unprotected human would say next. Margaret Williams stood quietly for a moment, looking around the enormous chamber at all the armored faces watching her. She could see the curiosity in their eyes, mixed with worry and confusion. These beings had never met anyone quite like her before. My suggestion is simple, she said finally. What if we tried having one meeting, just one, without all the armor and shields and barriers? What if we tried talking to each other the way humans do? The reaction was immediate. Several delegates gasped, which in some cases meant shooting flames or sparks. The insect diplomat Chitrik made rapid clicking sounds that meant extreme alarm in his language. Even the calm crystalline delegate started glowing brighter with shock. Human Williams, Ambassador Krelth said, his voice shaking slightly, that would be suicide. Do you not understand what we are? We are not like your species. We are dangerous to each other. Margaret tilted her head, looking genuinely curious. How much do you actually know about human history, Ambassador Krelth? The standard diplomatic files, Krelth replied. Some tribal conflicts, territorial disputes, the usual growing pains of a developing species. Nothing particularly unusual. Margaret smiled, but this time it was a sad smile instead of the confident one that had been worrying everyone. I think it is time you learned the real story of humanity. She reached into her simple leather bag and pulled out a small device. With the press of a button, the air above the chamber filled with three-dimensional pictures that everyone could see clearly. The first image showed two early humans hitting each other with wooden clubs. This is how human conflict began, Margaret explained. Simple violence between individuals. We fought over food, over shelter, over mates, over anything we could think of. The images changed, showing larger groups of humans with better weapons. Stone axes became bronze swords. Bronze swords became iron spears. Iron spears became steel blades. As we got smarter, we got better at killing each other, Margaret continued, her voice calm and factual. We invented new weapons constantly. We found new reasons to fight constantly. We turned violence into an art form. The pictures kept changing, showing human armies getting larger and more organized. Castles under siege, ships firing cannons at each other, soldiers charging across battlefields. We fought over territory, Margaret said. We fought over resources. We fought over ideas. We fought over which god was the right god to worship. Sometimes we fought just because we were bored. Senator Thraxon leaned forward in his armor, fascinated despite himself. How long did this continue? It never stopped, Margaret replied simply. Humans have been at war for 95% of our recorded history. Somewhere on Earth there has always been a battle happening. New images appeared, showing weapons that made the delegates gasp in horror. Explosions that destroyed entire cities, poisonous gases that killed thousands, machines that could level mountains. We got very, very good at killing, Margaret said. We invented weapons that could destroy armies in seconds. We created diseases that could wipe out entire populations. We built machines of war that could fight for us while we stayed safe. The images showed the ultimate human weapon, a mushroom cloud rising over a city, turning everything below it into ash and shadow. And then we built weapons that could end our entire species, Margaret said quietly. Bombs powerful enough to crack planets. Poisons that could kill every living thing on our world. We reached the point where we could destroy ourselves completely. The chamber was absolutely silent. Even the constant humming and buzzing of various alien technologies seemed to have stopped. Many species learn wisdom through peace, Margaret continued. Humans learned wisdom through war. We discovered that the only thing worse than fighting each other was the possibility of having no one left to fight. Ambassador Krelth found his voice first. But how did you survive? If you were so violent, so dangerous to each other, how are you still alive? Margaret gestured to herself, standing unprotected in the middle of hundreds of deadly alien beings. We learned the most important lesson in the galaxy. We learned that sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do is also the most necessary thing you can do. What do you mean? Asked the thermal being, his flames flickering with curiosity. We learned to trust each other, Margaret said. Not because we were safe from each other, but because we were too dangerous to each other. When every human could destroy every other human, we had to find another way to solve our problems. She walked closer to the various delegates, her soft shoes making no sound on the chamber floor. Every person in my species carries the genetic memory of 10,000 generations of warriors. We are descended from the most successful fighters in our planet's history. But we are also descended from the ones who chose to stop fighting when it mattered most. The mind reader delegate pulsed with interest. You are saying that humans became peaceful through violence? No, Margaret corrected. We became careful through violence. We became wise through violence. We learned that the strongest person is not the one who can hurt others the most, but the one who can choose not to hurt others when they have the power to do so. She gestured around the chamber again. Look at all of you. You wear armor because you are afraid of each other. But your armor does not make you safer, it makes you more afraid. It makes you think of each other as threats instead of allies. Young Chitrick buzzed nervously. But Human Williams, what if you are wrong? What if someone gets hurt? Margaret looked at him with gentle eyes. Then we learn from it. We help them heal. We figure out how to do better next time. That is what families do. Families? Several delegates asked at the same time. That is what we are, Margaret said simply. 400 different species trying to share one galaxy. We can do it as enemies hiding behind walls, or we can do it as family members learning to live together. The silence that followed was different from before. It was not the silence of shock or fear. It was the silence of beings thinking very hard about something they had never considered before. 3 days later, the real test came. The Galactic Senate was scheduled to discuss the most painful topic in their history, the Expansion Wars Memorial. This was the subject that had caused more fights, more walkouts, and more diplomatic disasters than any other issue in the past century. Ambassador Krelth checked his armor 3 extra times that morning. Every piece of protective equipment was running at maximum power. Around him, other delegates were doing the same thing, but with even more concern than usual. Some were wearing backup armor on top of their regular armor. Others had brought additional shields and energy barriers. The expansion wars had lasted for over 100 years and had touched every species in the galaxy. Entire worlds had been destroyed. Billions of beings had died. Some species had been wiped out completely, existing now only in historical records. Every delegate in the chamber had lost something precious during those terrible years. Margaret Williams entered the chamber wearing the same simple blue suit she always wore. Her leather bag looked smaller than usual, and Krelth noticed she was not even carrying her notebook. She sat down in her regular seat and folded her hands in her lap, looking as calm as if she were waiting for a pleasant dinner. Senator Thraxon called the session to order, his voice heavy with dread. Delegates, we gather today to discuss the proposed Expansion Wars Memorial. The committee has suggested building a monument on the neutral world of Haven Prime to honor all those who were lost. The trouble started immediately. The Crystalline Coalition delegate stood up, his glass body ringing like a bell with anger. How dare you speak of memorials when the siege world still refused to admit their crimes? They deliberately destroyed our colony ships. They murdered millions of our children. Senator Vorthak of the siege worlds rose to his massive height, his rock-like body grinding and rumbling. The Crystalline Coalition lies as always. They were working with the Void Hunters. They betrayed the coordinates of our home worlds to the enemy. We did what we had to do to survive. Within seconds, the chamber erupted into chaos that was worse than anything Krelth had ever witnessed. The fire beings began blazing with rage that heated the air to over 800 degrees. Their section of the chamber started glowing red-hot, and the metal supports began to bend and melt. Emergency cooling systems activated automatically, spraying clouds of white steam everywhere. The sound weavers began their traditional grief song, but their sorrow was so deep that the sound waves cracked the reinforced walls. Windows throughout the chamber shattered, and several delegates had to activate emergency hearing protection to keep their eardrums from bursting. The pressure lords lost control of their emotions and created gravity fields so strong that the floor began to crack and buckle. Chairs that were not bolted down went flying through the air. 3 junior diplomats were pressed flat against the wall, unable to move under the crushing weight. The acid speakers started arguing in their most poisonous language, and their words literally ate holes in the air itself. Green and yellow smoke poured from their section, dissolving everything it touched. The chamber's air purification system screamed warnings as it tried to clean the deadly gases. The lightning people began shooting electric bolts in all directions, overloading power systems throughout the building. The lights flickered on and off, and several computer terminals exploded in showers of sparks. Through all of this deadly chaos, Margaret Williams sat perfectly still in her seat. Krelth watched in amazement as a wave of fire swept over her. The temperature around the human reached over 500 degrees, hot enough to melt copper instantly. Margaret did not even loosen her collar or take off her jacket. She just sat there as if nothing was happening. A gravity wave hit her next, increasing the weight around her by over 300%. The force should have crushed her bones and squeezed her organs until they burst. Instead, she simply adjusted her posture slightly and continued sitting calmly. Poisonous gas swirled around her, green clouds of acid that dissolved the metal chair next to her into bubbling liquid. Margaret breathed normally as if the air around her was perfectly clean and safe. A bolt of lightning struck the ground right beside her, leaving a smoking crater in the floor and filling the air with the smell of burned ozone. Margaret glanced at it with mild interest, then looked back at the fighting delegates. Young Chitrick scuttled over to her as fast as his 6 legs could carry him, his shell armor smoking from the heat. "Human Williams," he buzzed frantically. "You must take shelter. The fire beings are reaching critical temperature. The pressure lords are about to create a black hole. The acid speakers are dissolving the building." Margaret looked up at him with those calm, steady eyes. "Thank you for your concern, Chitrick. But I think everyone just needs to get their feelings out first. They have been holding in this pain for a very long time." Chitrick stared at her with all 6 of his eyes. Around them, the chamber was literally falling apart. Pieces of the ceiling were crashing down. The air was full of deadly energy, poisonous gas, and gravity distortions that could crush a battleship. And this human was talking about feelings. "But what if someone dies?" Chitrick asked desperately. "Then we will mourn them," Margaret replied simply. "And we will learn from what happened. But we cannot heal old wounds by hiding from them." She stood up, moving slowly and carefully through the chaos. Lightning bolts passed over her head. Gravity waves bent the space around her. Acid clouds hissed and bubbled where they touched her clothes, but somehow did not harm her. Margaret walked to the center of the chamber, to the exact spot where the memorial would be built if the motion passed. She stood there, small and unprotected, while the fury of 400 different species raged around her. And then, impossibly, she began to speak. Her voice was not loud, but somehow it carried through all the noise and chaos. Every delegate in the chamber heard her clearly, as if she were speaking directly into their minds. "I can hear all of your pain," she said. Margaret Williams stood in the eye of the storm, surrounded by deadly chaos that should have killed her a dozen times over. Her voice somehow reached every corner of the massive chamber, cutting through the noise like a gentle knife. "I can hear all of your pain," she repeated, turning slowly to look at each section of fighting delegates. "And you know what? You are all saying the exact same thing." The fire beings blazed even brighter with rage, but Margaret walked directly toward them. The heat was so intense that the air itself was glowing, but she moved through it as if it were a cool breeze. "You are burning with anger because you lost your children," she said to the fire beings. "Your flames are not weapons, they are tears made of light." She turned to the sound weavers whose grief song was still cracking the walls. "You sing because words are not enough to hold your sorrow. Your music carries the voices of everyone you could not save." The pressure lords were crushing everything around them with gravity, but Margaret walked into their section without hesitation. The weight should have flattened her instantly, but she moved as if she were walking through water. "You make everything heavy because that is how loss feels," she said to them. "Every person you loved who died in the wars, you carry their weight with you always." Ambassador Krelth watched in total amazement as Margaret moved from section to section, walking through deadly energies and poisonous gases like they were harmless air. She spoke to each group of delegates, and wherever she went, the violence began to calm down. "The Crystalline Coalition," she said, approaching the glass-like beings, "you are sharp and cutting because you have been broken so many times. Every harsh word you speak is a piece of your shattered heart. The Siege Worlds," she continued, walking to the rock creatures, "you build walls and barriers because you are afraid of being hurt again. Your armor is not protection, it is a way to hide your fear." One by one she named every species in the chamber. One by one she explained their pain in simple words that everyone could understand. And one by one the deadly chaos began to quiet down. Senator Thraxon, the enormous armored leader, finally spoke. His voice was much quieter than usual. Human Williams, how can you know these things? How can you walk through our anger and not be destroyed? Margaret stopped in the center of the chamber and looked up at him. Because I understand what you are really fighting about. You are not angry about territory or politics or who was right during the war. You are angry because you hurt, and you do not know how to make the hurting stop. She reached into her small leather bag and pulled out a single piece of paper. It looked very old and had been folded many times. This is a letter written by a human soldier during our last great war, she said, holding it up for everyone to see. He was dying on a battlefield far from home and he wrote this to his family. Would you like to know what it says? The chamber was completely quiet now. Even the emergency alarms had stopped ringing. Margaret unfolded the paper carefully. He wrote, I am not afraid to die, but I am afraid that my death will not mean anything. I am afraid that the people I love will hurt forever because of what happened here. I wish I could tell them that the pain will end someday, and that they will learn to be happy again. She folded the paper and put it away. Every being who died in the expansion wars wrote a letter like this in their heart. Every parent who lost a child, every child who lost a parent, every friend who lost a friend. They all wanted the same thing, they wanted the people they loved to stop hurting and learn to be happy again. Young Chitrick scuttled closer, his shell armor no longer smoking. But how do we stop hurting, Human Williams? How do we forget what happened? Margaret smiled at him, and for the first time, her smile did not make anyone nervous. We do not forget, Chitrick. We remember together. We share the weight of our sadness so that no one has to carry it alone. She gestured around the chamber. Look what just happened here. You all shared your pain at the same time and no one died. Yes, the building got damaged and yes, it was dangerous. But you expressed your deepest feelings and you are all still here. Senator Thraxon leaned forward in his massive armor. Are you saying we should have more meetings like this? I am saying you should have meetings like this without the armor, Margaret replied. I am saying you should trust each other enough to be vulnerable together. The silence that followed was different from any silence the chamber had ever experienced. It was not the silence of fear or shock. It was the silence of beings thinking about possibilities they had never imagined. Ambassador Krelth found himself reaching up toward his helmet controls. His hands shook as he touched the release mechanism. Around the chamber, other delegates were making similar small movements. What if we are not ready? Asked the mind reader delegate. What if we accidentally hurt each other? Margaret looked directly at the floating brain in its protective case. Then you will apologize and help each other heal and try to do better next time. That is what family does. She walked back to her simple seat and sat down, folding her hands in her lap again. The memorial motion is still on the table. But I suggest we vote on something else first. What? Several delegates asked at once. I suggest we vote on whether to have our next meeting without armor. Just once as an experiment. To see what happens when we trust each other with our real feelings. Ambassador Krelth surprised himself by speaking first. I second the motion. Around the chamber, other voices began to join in. Slowly, carefully, but with growing confidence, the representatives of 400 worlds began to vote for the most dangerous thing any of them had ever considered doing. They voted to trust each other.